Is this working? It is. I'm going to stand up here not because I feel like a minister, but because there's a microphone. Of course, you all know why we're here today. When Mother died, we had a funeral for her that was a religious service, but today is a celebration of her life, and we want to laugh and be joyful and think about the happier things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then a couple of other people are going to have a few things to say. I know I didn't get to introduce everybody to everybody. So when we meet afterwards at the park, it'll be, you can move around, and I hope everyone will meet everyone else who's here. Have a pretty good sized group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, about double that, about 36 or something. Bill, did you know your brother's here and sister-in-law? Okay. And we're going to be giving roses to all the ladies. So I will get started. We're here to celebrate Mollie's, Irene. Some of you know her as Irene and some as Mollie, but her long life. She was born Irene Mae Branham on April 23rd, 1924. So she lived to be 97 and a half. She was born to Abraham and Willie Ann Willis Branham, the 14th of 17 children. And I have a cousin here who's shared my grandparents. I think you're the only one that shared the grandparents, Dan, you and I. Anybody else that I think not, okay. So as I said, we memorialized Mother at a regular funeral in October, but we're here to be a little more cheerful today. My mother had a lot of names. As I said, she was born Irene Mae Branham, and then she married my dad, became Irene Locke Stamfer. And when she married my dad, she gained a 8.5-year-old stepdaughter. And my mother was only a few days shy of 19, so she married into becoming a mother very quickly. So when I was born a year later, I called her Mommy, of course, for a while, but my sister Jean and I pretty much called her Mother. Then when Jean got married and had children, and how about Jean's children raising your hands? Okay. Bob, John, Sherry, and Ron. And they called her Mom. And then when my children were born, they called her Mulla, because they tried to say Mother, and Angela, when she was little, tried to say Mother, and it came out Mulla, so they called her Mulla. So that's Irene, Mother, Mulla, Mom. And then she was also known, of course, as Aunt Irene to her nieces and nephews. I don't think we have any. We're going to have a niece here today, but she got sick and couldn't come. So nobody that she was aunt to, but she had she was aunt to a lot of people. As you know, if there were 17 children in the family, at least 12 that survived to adulthood, there were a lot of grandchildren. And nieces and nephews, so she had lots of them, and she tried to keep in touch the best she could. Let me get back to the names a little bit. Sherry's husband, my niece Sherry's husband, called her Two Mom because his kids had called her Mom, so he just shortened it to Two Mom. So that was another name she had. And we have a cake that we're all going to enjoy afterwards that has her picture and all of her names on it that she's known. And of course, the one name I don't want to leave out is her Indian name, which was Winter Sun, which was a name that was good for her because she always brought warmth to cold places. When Mollie's marriage to my dad ended, she married Carol Walker, the love of her life, who unfortunately died in 2014. But two of his two brothers are here, and his one sister-in-law. And would you raise your hands, please? There they are. Okay, so we'll get everybody straight down. She really missed him terribly, even though he had been in a nursing home. He had had an accident many years before he died and had some brain damage, so he was in a nursing home. But she missed him. She missed him terribly. He was the love of her life, as I said. So she lived in her apartment for a while after that, and then when her health and her memory got too much of a problem for her to be alone, she moved in with some friends for a while, the Millers, and they were very good to her. But then eventually she came to live with Bill and me, and she was with us for about 3.5 years. She went then, the 4 months before she died, she was in an assisted living, and they treated her so beautifully. And one thing I did forget to bring today was a letter that one of the caregivers wrote to her. And she was part Indian, and she talked about how they had so much in common. And who just came in? Who did I miss? Oh, Justin. Hi. That's my great nephew, I guess. Yeah. Welcome. So, where am I here? Oh yes, the person, one of the caregivers from the assisted living, wrote a beautiful letter, and she said that she had gone on the day that my mother died. Come on in, Linda. This is a friend. She had gone on a retreat with her daughter, and they were meditating, and she had this feeling of a presence, and she was pretty sure it was my mother passing through, headed back to Amherst, where she was born. So it was a very sweet letter. And just to show you that, not too many caregivers from assisted living places bother to write a letter, but she did, and it was really lovely, and I meant to bring it, but I didn't. So that's the outline. Now to fill in this beautiful life, I'll start with my memories, and then we're going to hear from some other people who have really special memories about Mother as well. She was always kind and gentle. She never yelled, never, and certainly never hit me, much smacked me or anything. There was none of that. Although the house she grew up in, Danny can tell you, Grandma did a lot of smacks, didn't she, Danny? She was pretty tough, but if she had 17 children, I guess she lost her patience, and she was a tough mother of those 17 kids, or the 12 that lived to be adults. But Granddaddy was very kind and very sweet, and I think that kindness, that sweetness, carried over to Mother, and so she was always that way to everybody. I think all of you here know that. She's a very good person. So when Mother and Carol got married in the early years of their marriage, they took on 2 foster children for a year, and that was a long time ago, and they're here today. Doris and Carolyn, want to raise your hands? See, 2 more people. So here's 50-some years later, they still kept in touch and bothered to come here. Were you from North Carolina? Yeah, okay. That's right, yes, she met them in Amherst, but now they live in North Carolina. My mother, as far back as I can remember, she read to me, she sang to me, she listened to me, and she talked to me, and she helped me. She worked for doctors most of her life, her adult life, and the first one was Dr. Gaylord, and his daughter is here today, Linda Gaylord. She's all the way in the back there. So these, there's so many people who have known Mother for so many years and kept in touch. And I think that's very special because she was a very special lady. She loved getting together with people. So she would have Christmas parties, and at that point she had a townhouse. She and Carol had a townhouse. And townhouses are not very, it was a 3-bedroom townhouse, but like living room, dining room, kitchen on the first floor, 3 bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs, maybe 2 bathrooms upstairs. And we would have like 100 people at these parties. I mean, you could hardly find a place to sit or, hold your plate of food. But she loved that. And she always, when she lived with me, she would say, you could have a party. Your house is big enough for that. But I'm not very good at that. But she was wonderful at that. So she cried with me when my first marriage fell apart. And she rejoiced with me when I met Bill and was so happy that I was very happy. And I didn't mention, I've had people raise their hands, but will my 3 children raise their hands right now? Okay, all around. And my grandchildren, raise your hands. A bunch of them. And great-grandchildren. 3 great-grandchildren, yeah. So, I've gotten to be a big family. Mollie's Christian faith was very strong. No matter what the world said or what anybody said, she had her strong beliefs, and she knew she was going to go to heaven. And toward the end, she would say, "I never thought I'd live this long," And I think that she was ready to die when she died, and she longed to be reunited with the baby boy that she had lost when she was very young. She never stopped grieving for him. He was only 18 months old, and he died of spinal meningitis, because in those days that was a death sentence, especially for an infant. So that was something that she looked forward to when death came. She also believed or cared very much about the Monacan Indians. She worked very hard to reorganize the Indians, and because years ago we thought we were Cherokee and then found out we were Monacans because of the what do you call them, artifacts that were not Cherokee artifacts. They were Monacan artifacts, and she worked very hard to get the group of Monacans from Maryland together, even to going through this is when you had phone books, going through the phone book to look up everybody who had a Monacan last. There were 15 surnames in the Monacans. And she made some cold calls to people and even went to their houses, till we at one time had a pretty good sized group of Monacans in Maryland. And unfortunately, those of us who were part of that have gotten older, and it's sort of drifted apart. And the young people didn't seem to be as interested, or they moved away, and so it wasn't possible to keep them together. But anyway, Mother did love the Monacans, and she was so happy that we got federal recognition while she was still alive. So that was a really nice thing for her. So as I said, her Christian faith was strong, her Indian faith was very strong, and speaking of her lifetime, she was the last of the 17 children to die, and she was the oldest, the one that lived the oldest of any of the 17. So that's pretty good. She was pretty healthy right up until the very end. So now I'm going to, I'm going to read you something that she wrote years ago when I was doing a newsletter for the Maryland Monacans. I had asked that anyone who wanted to share their life, the elders, if they would write something, and not too many of them did, but she did. And this, I shortened it a little because the end is not, was about when she was still doing the bed and breakfast. But this is what she wrote. Okay, it's called So That You May Know. She said, "For years I have heard that those of us who left Virginia and moved to Maryland didn't experience prejudice as you did in Virginia. This is partially true, but not absolutely so. Anytime people are hurt by carelessly spoken words or actions, it makes a difference and cuts the individual receiving those slurs and actions to the core. Such was the case with me. The unfortunate code of silence that still exists today left many of us wondering, who are we? We have been lost in that abyss, feeling as though something is wrong. But what is it and why? We wanted to fit in as part of the community, but there was no way without truthful answers to unanswered questions. And by the way, the Indians in Virginia were not allowed to go to public schools until 1962. It was the year I graduated from high school. So that's pretty bad. But she continues. She says, when I was in the 11th grade in high school, I was summoned to the counselor's office. When I entered her office, oh, by the way, I will back up. My grandparents moved to Maryland when my mother was 3 and a half. So she did get to go to school up here. So when she was in the 11th grade, she was summoned to the counselor's office, and she had said the counselor's name was Roberta White. Now, that was a long time ago, but this stood out to her because it was so terrible. She didn't show me the courtesy of asking me to sit down or call me by my first name. She asked me to extend my arm toward her and then proceeded to scratch my arm with her fingernail. It left a mark, as it would with a scratch. She said, "Branham, do you ever take a bath?" The question startled and embarrassed me. I told her that I took a bath every day. It was as though the line she drew on my arm would disappear if I bathed every day. The next question came as another surprise. She asked, "Branham, what do you expect to do when you graduate from high school?" I told her I had no idea, but that I couldn't go to college, so I would have to go to work. At this juncture, she said that she would suggest I try to find a job in a classy neighborhood with a rich family as a maid. End of interview. That episode spoke volumes to me as I left her office. I was so low that I couldn't share the interview with anyone. I felt embarrassed, inadequate, hurt, angry, and shocked at such a demeaning exchange. I didn't know what to do. I left school, and since it was World War II, I went to work in a government facility where I worked until I married my boss. A wrong choice. That was my father. But I was on the road to making many wrong choices. I went to work for an insurance company where I worked for about 2 years in statistics, very dry and non-productive. One day, a friend who was working for a physician told me she was leaving her job because of pregnancy. Fortunately, I was to make a wise decision and applied for her job. This employer, which was Dr. Gaylord, whose daughter is back there, taught me many things. Under his tutelage, I learned all the jobs one needed to do in a medical office, including x-ray technique, laboratory work, telephone etiquette, and everything necessary for the efficient running of a medical surgical office. And I will say this, Dr. Gaylord had an x-ray machine at his facility and a dark room downstairs. So she not only took the x-rays, she developed them. And she gave shots, and she weighed babies, and she did everything. It answered the phone, and after a few years, it took about 3 people to replace her. I worked there for 7 years, and then when I left my first husband, I went to work for a pediatrician where I worked for 30 years. After retiring from the medical office, I decided to follow a dream. For years, I had dreamed of opening a bed and breakfast inn. My husband and I moved to Virginia's Eastern Shore. Our house was an old Victorian in need of major repairs, so we contracted to have the work done, and in 1990, we opened our doors to the Still Meadow Bed and Breakfast Inn. But the dream was short-lived. In 1992, my husband was in an auto accident that left him with brain injury, from which he never recovered. The B&B was a wonderful enterprise for me. Unfortunately, after 6 years, I had to give it up because my husband was becoming very difficult to control. But since I am not one to give up easily, I took a job of substitute innkeeping for friends who had inns and needed to be out of town. I found it rewarding, and it helped me keep my dream alive. When my husband's dementia-related problems became too difficult to handle, he and I moved to Maryland. After a year, I was able to get him into a nursing home and find senior's apartment for myself in Stevensville, Maryland. And she says, where I live today. So this was written many years ago. And it goes on a little bit, but it doesn't reflect all the things that I wanted to say. That she not only ran a bed and breakfast, she learned how to quilt. She took, what do you call it, painting, what's the kind of painting? Watercolor painting. She sang in a women's chorus group. She made ceramics. I mean, she was never still. And she was also a very, very good cook and baker. So now that I've shared her words and some of mine, we're going to hear from some people who want to say something about her as far as their relationship. So Sherry, would you start us off? Okay. Sherry, again, if you didn't get all the relationships here, is my sister's daughter, and she's been like another one of mine.
I wrote some notes because if I just speak from my heart, I'll never shut up. Aunt Gloria explained that my mom raised my mother. From age 8 to 80. And she didn't have to. You hear about the wicked stepmother, you know. She was, as you all know, amazing. And I didn't realize it until I was probably 60, how much of that trickled down to myself, my brothers, our children, just because she was always so kind and loving. And so she was my grandmother for 65 years, and whoever gets to say that, you know? Most people say, I never knew my grandmother. But it's made all the difference in the world, and we're all very grateful. My mom loved God, and it is said that God is love. Well, my mom embodied love. I mean, I'm not saying anything all of you don't already know. If she knew you at all, she loved you, no matter who you were. That's just how she went through life. She was very adventurous. If she had planned something and was in the middle of it, she was already thinking and planning on what she was going to do next. She never stopped moving, and that was her inspiration to us, just to keep moving. And she was hardworking and fun-loving and kind and wise and funny. And she loved people, she loved animals, she loved food, she loved flowers, and she loved life. And she sang and she laughed. And one of the funny things was, she was at my mom's house one time. My mom wasn't home yet. And my mom's little Pomeranian came out in the yard, and that dog used to bark at hoses, like it was a snake. And my mom thought that was hilarious. So my mom turned on the hose and was wetting the dog, and I'm thinking, Mom's gonna freak, you know. And Mom just sat there watering the dog and laughing her head off. And but she embraced life, and she was a great example for all of us. And the world was better with her in it. And she lives on in all of our hearts, and I know you all feel that. And she will always be alive for that reason. She's our treasure and our inspiration, and she'll always be remembered fondly and missed deeply. And there is a poem by John Keats that just makes me think of her. And you've all heard it, I'm sure. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. It makes a person happy for a long time, even if its beauty fades or is put into different circumstances. It is always a source of enjoyment, happiness, and pleasure. So, in beauty, may my mom walk forever. Thank you.
Thank you, sweetie. Bert, can you hobble up here and give us your words? Bert, again, is my stepfather's brother, technically my uncle, even though I'm older than he is.
Gloria, thank you for inviting us. When Irene married my brother, technically she became my sister-in-law. Shortly, she became our sister-in-love because we loved her dearly. And she loved us. There was no question that she loved us dearly too. Everybody she met, she loved. She was fun. She had the most wonderful laugh, most beautiful eyes. I fell in love with her just like my brother did. She loved to fish. She loved people. We used to visit her on the Eastern Shore, and my two sons, she fell in love with them too. Such a wonderful experience. I never remember her. Well, we cried together several times when my brother had his accident and through some of his surgeries that he had. But the thing she taught us most of all is unconditional love. She loved him dearly as she did everybody. And it didn't matter what you did or who you did or what was going on in your life. She would tell you she didn't like it, but she'd also tell you she loved you. Such a wonderful spirit to have blessed us on this earth, and she'll continue to bless us because she is truly in my heart forever, and I know she is in all of yours. The way she'd speak about her grandchildren and her great-grandchildren, and even though I had met most of you, she made us all feel like part of the one big family. She had the most wonderful laugh. I met her when I was a young teenager. And I found out early on that you don't lie to Irene because she'll catch you every time. I was at one of their homes in Maryland visiting for a week or so, and I had snuck out a cigarette and smoked it, and I put the filter in my pocket. And she said, "Have you been smoking?" "No." "You should never lie. I found the cigarette butt in your pocket." And I looked at her in those eyes, and man, I felt horrible. That taught me one big lesson that you can't get that out of a book. When she'd look at you and you could see the hurt in her eyes because you lied to her. So I never did that again. I did learn from that. But no matter what, she continued to love us dearly. I will truly miss her. I have missed her. It got to the point that as we got older and I had back problems and couldn't travel much, but I was determined I was going to get here. So fortunately, my brother drove us, and I wanted to be here for this. Just to tell y'all that she was such a wonderful person, and I'm sure in y'all there's the same wonderfulness. She was one of the delights of my life, and I can't imagine that I'll ever meet a person that I'll love more, except my wife. Got to say that because she's sitting right over there. Anyway, God bless all of you. He blessed us with Irene, and I'm so happy to be part of this celebration. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert. Edward, you are up next. This is my son, Edward.